The United States of America, the world's superpower, an economic power, a military power, and a cultural power.
What?
What country you from?
What?
What ain't no country I ever heard of? They speak English and what?
What?
English, motherfucker! Do you speak it?
This isn't the first time you've heard this idea in recent months. More and more economists, geopolitical analysts, and international strategists are talking about something that, until recently, seemed unthinkable: the possible decline of the American empire. But the key question is why? To understand why the United States might fall, we first need to understand why it rose so high. And for that, we have to travel back in time. The true birth of the American dream. Although the term American dream formally appeared in 1931, its true birth came after World War II. In 1945, after the defeat of the Axis powers, the United States emerged from the war in a position unique in modern history. The industry had grown to unprecedented levels and the direct competitors were devastated. Europe lay in ruins, Japan was destroyed, and the Soviet Union, though victorious, had lost more than 20 million people. The United States didn't just win the war, it won the system. The dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki under the presidency of Harry Truman was not merely a military decision. Beyond accelerating the end of the conflict, it was a direct geopolitical message, not only to Japan but to the Soviet Union. The United States was demonstrating that it possessed a level of technological and destructive power that was unreachable. The post-war world would have a new arbiter. During the war, the American industrial machine sustained the Allied forces. The United States produced and exported food, oil, weapons, vehicles, and industrial equipment. By 1945, its economy represented nearly 50% of global GDP. Never before had a single nation concentrated so much productive power. When Nazi Germany fell, that enormous industrial capacity was not dismantled. It was redirected toward a single goal: to become a permanent global hegemon. To consolidate its power in Europe, the United States launched the Marshall Plan, investing more than $13 billion in the reconstruction of the continent. But this was not pure altruism. The United States wasn't just helping, it was buying geopolitical loyalty. In 1944, even before the war ended, 44 countries met in Bretton Woods to create a new global economic order. From that meeting emerged three fundamental pillars. The US dollar became the central currency of the system. The dollar would be convertible into gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. And two key institutions were created: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. In practice, this meant something simple but brutal. The world would trust the dollar, and the United States would control the system. Because it held most of the world's gold reserves, Washington became the absolute center of international finance. But by the late 1960s, the system began to crack. There were more dollars in circulation than gold to back them. In 1971, President Richard Nixon made a historic decision. He suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold.
We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world.
From that moment on, the dollar was no longer backed by gold. Currencies began to float freely. The modern money system was born. Paradoxically, this strengthened the United States. It could now issue dollars without limit. And the world still needed that currency for trade, debt, and energy. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the United States remained as the world's sole superpower. It proclaimed itself the police of the world, exported its economic model, and its culture became omnipresent. For decades, no one could challenge it. Until now. Because all the signs we see today, debt, polarization, and loss of global trust, point to a disturbing conclusion: that entire system is beginning to fracture, and what once seemed eternal may not be. The first problem, the economy. Like I said before, after 1945, the dollar became the center of the global financial system. And even today, it's still the main currency in international reserves, the dominant currency in global trade, and the currency most of the world's debt is priced in. But even though the dollar going up and down has been pretty normal in the 21st century, we've never seen this level of uncertainty. The dollar hit a 4-year low in January 2026, and it's not random. It's a mix of short-term chaos and deeper structural problems. Markets are reacting to what many analysts describe as the erratic and unpredictable nature of US policy. And yes, a lot of that has to do with Donald Trump.
Country is winning again. In fact, we're winning so much
that we really don't know what to do about it.
Unlike previous administrations, the White House has openly said it prefers a weak dollar to boost exports. Trump has even said you make a lot more money with a weak dollar. And investors basically took that as a green light to start moving money out of the currency. And structurally, the dollar's dominance as the world's favorite reserve currency is slowly fading. According to IMF data, its share of global reserves fell to a 30-year low by mid-2025. On top of that, there's growing political pressure on the Federal Reserve. People are worried about the executive branch interfering with the Fed's independence. Trump has repeatedly pushed for lower interest rates and is expected to appoint leaders more aligned with his views. Historically, when a central bank gets politicized, it often means more money printing. And that leads to inflation eating away at the currency's real value. The biggest problem might be Donald Trump himself. Throughout 2025, he's imposed tariffs on major allies in the European Union, Asia, and even close partners like Canada and Japan.
President Donald Trump is threatening to impose tariffs on countries that oppose his plan to take over Greenland.
This morning, the European Union hit the brakes on ratifying a U.S. trade deal after President Trump threatened a new 15% global tariff.
And here's the irony. While trying to reduce the trade deficit, those tariffs may have done the opposite strategically. They've pushed enemies closer to allies and allies closer to new economic blocs. Trade agreements between the European Union and Mercosur, and between the EU and India, are basically ways to reduce dependence on the United States. They give those regions more diversification and more strategic autonomy in response to US protectionism. A stronger European Union also means a stronger euro, which is the only currency that can realistically compete with the dollar globally. If Mercosur and India trade more with Europe, they can negotiate in a currency other than the dollar, lowering their dependence on US financial institutions and policy. The EU-India deal has even been called the mother of all trade agreements. And ironically, it gained momentum largely because of Trump's trade policies. At first, tariffs actually strengthened the dollar because of short-term trade optimism. But using tariffs as a geopolitical weapon has slowly damaged trust in the stability of the US system. Now here's what this means for regular people. If the dollar gets devalued, it means with the same bill you'll buy less stuff, especially imported goods. When the dollar weakens, imports get more expensive. And since the US imports a lot, that pushes prices up. Higher prices mean more inflation. And inflation quietly destroys purchasing power. If your income doesn't rise as fast as prices, you're effectively getting poorer. This hits retirees and people with fixed incomes the hardest. So in simple terms, your paycheck might look the same on paper, but it buys less. Right now, US national debt is around $36 trillion. But the issue isn't just that the number is huge, it's how fast it keeps growing. Debt is increasing much faster than the US economy itself. In simple terms, the country is piling up debt far quicker than it's creating real wealth. This is something the billionaire Ray Dalio talks about often. According to him, when a country reaches this stage of excessive debt, the system doesn't collapse overnight. It slowly becomes structurally unstable.
Interest payments and debt service payments are adding up.
To put this into perspective, the US debt to GDP ratio is now over 120%. That means the country owes more money than it produces in an entire year. They can roll over debt, issue bonds, refinance, and kick the can down the road. But that only works as long as people trust the system. And here's where things get dangerous. History shows that when debt grows faster than productivity, governments usually choose the same solution: printing money. Not because it's smart, but because it's politically easier and safer. Raising taxes is unpopular, cutting spending is unpopular, defaulting is unthinkable. So the path of least resistance is monetary expansion. And what does that lead to? Inflation. Inflation is basically a hidden tax. No one votes for it, but everyone pays it. Prices go up, money buys less, and purchasing power slowly disappears. Debt looks smaller in real terms, which helps the government, but hurts regular people. That's why countries with massive debt often need inflation. Now add another layer: interest payments. As interest rates rise, servicing the debt becomes insanely expensive. The US already spends hundreds of billions of dollars every year just paying interest, not reducing the debt, just keeping it alive. At some point, interest becomes one of the biggest items in the budget, so the government borrows more to pay interest. That's a debt spiral. And once again, this connects back to the dollar. More debt means more dollars issued. More dollars mean a weaker currency over time. And a weaker currency means inflation eats away at everyday life. So when you hear that the economy is growing, but everything feels more expensive. This is why. The only ones making money are the billionaires and the people like Trump. In the end, this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about a system that survives by borrowing from the future and sending the bill to ordinary people. And sooner or later, the future shows up. The social problem. So far we've talked about money, debt, and the history behind the American dream. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Today, the American dream is basically out of reach. In 2025, the average home price in the US hit an all-time high of $435,000. Buying a house keeps getting more expensive, while people aren't actually earning more. And this changes everything. It's not just about owning property. It's about not being able to plan a future. Starting a family, having kids, or even just having a place of your own starts to feel impossible. In more than 99% of US counties, the average home is officially considered unaffordable for the average worker. According to a study by Harvard University, for the first time in US history, only 30% of young people aged 18 to 29 believe they'll be better off financially than their parents. About 43% of young Americans say they're struggling, or just barely getting by with limited financial security. Young people know the system is stacked against them. They don't believe in it anymore. Only 13% think the country is headed in the right direction. Meanwhile, 57% believe it's going in the wrong direction. And it gets darker. About 64% of young Americans describe US democracy as in trouble. And within that group, 19% believe it has already failed. And as if all of that wasn't enough, the average young person doesn't even want to talk anymore. Around 47% avoid political conversations out of fear of backlash. And 33% say they feel judged just for sharing their beliefs. So you end up with a society that's angry, anxious, and silent. In a deeply polarized society, with weak political parties and a president who constantly discredits anyone or anything that challenges him, the result is explosive. Especially when you add a state agency with military power, detaining people based on appearance or immigration status, often without solid evidence. One of the biggest issues with ICE is that it's essentially untouchable. It's heavily shielded by the state and massively overfunded relative to its actual results. Before 2025, ICE operated with annual budgets of around $9 to $10 billion. But in July 2025, the United States Congress approved an extraordinary funding injection of nearly $75 billion available through 2029. And here's the most disturbing part. A large portion of that money funds deportations without trial. ICE relies heavily on mechanisms like expedited removal, which allow people to be deported without ever seeing an immigration judge and often no real access to a lawyer. The United States is spending tens of billions of dollars on an agency that reduces legal protections, normalizes deportation without trial, and uses fear as a political tool. This isn't efficiency, this isn't security, it's neo-fascism.
ICE detained 4 students, including a 5-year-old who just arrived home from school with his father. District leaders say that ICE detained the father and son. Another adult in the home asked ICE agents to let the child go and was denied. The boy's father has an active asylum case with no order for deportation. The family's lawyer says the 2 are now in federal custody. The Department of Homeland Security refutes the allegations and said in a statement, ICE did not target a child.
On top of all that, the government starts pointless wars. It protects the interests of foreign nations that commit genocide and sends billions of dollars to kill children. I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of American citizens don't want to start conflicts in the Middle East. And the recent US attacks on Iran show something even more troubling for the country. The United States will stop having allies and will have vassal states until the imminent collapse. The image of Donald Trump, and even the image of the United States itself, is falling apart. The average citizen no longer trusts the system, and a point will come when they simply won't take it anymore. The world is clearly moving back into an era where power and force matter more than rules, and the United States seems to be reviving an old logic, consolidating control over its hemisphere to compete with Russia and China. We are heading toward a new world order. A world order where force is the foundation of political relationships, where some countries commit acts that would once have triggered global outrage and face little to no consequences. I've never liked saying war is coming, but it's not a coincidence that nearly every major country is ramping up military spending right now, especially Europe. The global economy itself is being reshaped by pressure from the 3 major powers, and the United States, despite all its internal problems, is still trying to lock down its zones of influence, almost like building a geopolitical shield to protect itself. In this new world order, smaller countries are basically at the mercy of whoever dominates them. Personally, I think there are clear signs that the United States is entering a new phase of its history. I don't expect a sudden collapse, What I see instead is something slower, quieter, and far more dangerous. A long decline that could last years. And history tells us one thing very clearly. Declines like this come with violence. The history of the United States isn't exactly clean when it comes to blood. And if the empire really is starting to wobble, it won't be the biggest players who pay the price, it'll be the smaller countries.